So hello everyone and welcome to our panel Few Against Many, designing overwhelming tactical encounter. Today we are diving into this moment in game where you are completely outnumbered on the edge of defeat and somehow you survived. These encounters are tense, dramatic and strangely satisfying, and today we will explore what makes them so special. So to introduce myself, I am Robin FAU, game designer at Ishtar Games, the studio behind The Last Spell. I will be guiding today's discussion with some fantastic fellow developers who all share a love for putting players in impossible situations. And speaking of The Last Spell, I will pass it over to Victor, who worked with me on the game, to introduce himself and say a few words about the project.
Yes, so I'm Victor. I have been working on The Last Spell during the early access and now on the DLCs. The Last Spell is a tactical roguelite where the player has to defend a town against hordes of enemies night after night. The game is released and we are now working on the DLCs. We have already released 2 DLCs and we're now working on a third. So yeah.
And Jorge, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi all. My name is Jorge Garcia. I work in Digital Sun Games. I've been working several years already with Cataclysmo, which is a blend between RTS, tower defense, and a modular-based building that forces you to hold off overwhelming or waves. Yeah, I work there as a producer, as a programmer, and also as a designer. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here to discuss everything which is related to game dev and RTS and, well, against odds. So yeah, and I will pass the ball to Max.
Everyone, my name is Maxim Tolmachov. I'm game designer at Door 407. And our main game is Diplomacy is Not an Option. It's a real-time strategy with massive amounts of enemies and also some city building mechanics. So yeah, nice to meet everyone. Hope we have a good talk.
Thank you. So, first question. In your experience, especially in strategy and tactical games, what makes the against all odds moments so emotionally satisfying for player, unlike other game genre? I don't know if you want to begin, Victor.
Yes, I can begin. So yes, for the against all odds, which is I think a bit the center of the talk. It's mainly in a game like The Last Spell, where you can have all the time, take all your time to think about the things and about the situation. The fact that the player can just really think about it and overcome the situation probably makes the player feel extremely. It's so rewarding. It makes you feel extremely clever. So I think the satisfaction aspect comes from there, at least in The Last Spell. And for the against all odds moment, I think the main aspect of it is it has to be designed around. So, for example, in The Last Spell, I think the most important thing is to make the player feel like the situation is desperate, so that you can bring this against all odds moment. And for me, the keyword is really feeling, because I think there are a lot of times where the situation, maybe if you think of it from just a very gameplay perspective, it's not that desperate, but the player really feels like, oh no, this is the end. This is too much. There are too many enemies, and he really feels like this is way too difficult for me. But in reality, he tries to play and he achieves it. he can overcome the obstacle. And so, yes, I think this is the most important thing, to really make the player feel like it's a desperate situation when it actually really isn't.
Mhm.
And yes, the last thing I think is, which kind of resembles what I already said, but the asymmetry of the game, having many enemies against very few. In the last spell, it's heroes mainly. The town is a bit slightly secondary, but heroes, just maybe you have 4, 5, 6 heroes against hundreds of enemies. The sheer asymmetry of the two just immediately creates this feeling of, oh, this is way too much, especially compared to what you see in classic tactical games. So yeah, I think it comes a lot from this also.
If I may add, I generally agree with you. So yeah, it is a created feeling, but what makes it important for strategy games is that this genre usually is based on a lot of choices with high frequency, with high impact. You always have to make these choices during game, and these choices, they lead to other choices. This makes these types of games strategy games, and having such an involvement with choice making and feeling the impact of these choices, I guess that's the reason why you get such a high satisfaction after battling the encounter, let it be a battle or some economical disaster. It's like maybe when you go to an exam and you have been preparing all night, and suddenly you get the question you are not prepared to. So you have to use all the knowledge you have gathered before to pass this test, and you actually have this knowledge and you pass, but it's like a hard, it's really difficult, and the satisfaction comes from both the preparation you've taken and the choices you've made. Yeah, so that's what I think why this is more about the satisfaction is crucial for strategy games.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I think what makes everything related to against all odds so emotionally satisfying, I think it taps into something very primal from our human perspective, I would say, which is the satisfaction of survival, problem solving under pressure, and of course the mastery of the systems. So I think, as Max said, tactical and strategy games constantly force players to make meaningful decisions, and all those mini decisions is like they have a very cascading consequences. I don't know if I make myself understand you, but yeah, you have like, yeah, I'm gonna move that unit there and that other unit there, but that itself doesn't make it's not a meaningful decision, but the sum of all the minor decisions you made is what makes the victory feel truly earned. And I also feel that in RTS, what makes it different from other genres is that you are not just reacting, you are like actively analyzing, understanding patterns, predicting enemy moves, and you are adapting to it. So yeah, it's like, as Victor said, you feel like you have no option, but then you feel very clever because you found the solution to the puzzle, I would say. And for me, for example, personally, one of the most enjoyable aspects for when I'm playing a strategy game is to learn and recognize, for example, the AI priorities and the behavior, and trying to outsmart them, like manipulating somehow the behavior they have. that moment when you realize you are not just surviving but outsmarting the system is truly satisfying, I would say. And I also wanted to mention that often in RTS especially, it's like the payoff of the result is normally delayed. Like you will probably wait like maybe hours of gameplay in order to see what are the consequences of the decisions you made like 1 hour or 2 hours ago. At least in Cataclysmo is like this. So yeah, that delayed validation I think is incredibly rewarding, because you see how the impact of all the minor decisions has become a reality, for example. So yeah, I agree with both of you, I would say. Yeah.
Yes, and on this thing of long-term decisions, I think that's also where the decision making is really maybe fun in these games. It's that as a player you have to really project yourself and kind of think about, okay, what will happen in 1 day, 2 days, 1 hours of gameplay, and see every possible solution. And I think that's really exciting for a player also to kind of project themselves in what will happen, how would my build pan out, something like that.
Yeah, and I want to add, like, when we were preparing the question with Victor, we speak about a thing like it's like David versus Goliath. I don't know, it's a different name in different language. I think it's David and Goliath. But the thing that we are only without stone and our sling versus a very giant enemies. In this case, it's really small enemies, but in outnumber us. And there is something like a wow effect when there is like hundreds of enemies, and in the end of free turn in the last battle, we speak in stone, but in your games it's like in 10 minutes after the beginning of the battle, we are like alive and with nearly everything that is standing still, and I think it's really cool. And it gives us a really good feeling, and like you say, it's something like very primal, like a thing that is very primal. And I think it's cool for this game. So it's cool because I can make a transition to the next question. But if someone has something more to say, can say it. It's okay. We can go to the other question. Yeah. Okay. So what are your recipe for balancing the power fantasy and the ultra vulnerability in the context where the player is constantly outnumbered? Is it about measuring the feeling of control over the battlefield or surviving it? So if someone wants to begin?
I can begin if you want, or whatever, Max.
As I wish.
You can
Yeah. So, well, I guess for Cataclysmo, the tension between the vulnerability and the power fantasy is something essential, as in other games like your games, like Diplomacy is Not an Option and The Last Spell, because you are always massively outnumbered, but you can create moments where you feel extremely powerful. So you feel like you are breaking the system somehow, and you're able to hold back hundreds of enemies with just a few units. For example, in The Last Spell, I really know it is like this. In Cataclysmo, we have few units, but we don't have so few units like you have in your case. And the contrast between having a small amount of pieces to solve the puzzle against, I don't know, 100, even 1,000 of enemies, it's the core thing there. For example, as an anecdote, in Cataclysmo, a major turning point during development was prototyping the idea of that every unit had just 1 HP. So we came to that realization when we saw that players didn't want to build stuff, and they just played the game like in a traditional RTS, like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft or whatever. And we just forced ourselves to make all units to have 1 HP to see how it forces the player to overcome that situation and forces the player to build stuff to overcome the situation. And yeah, in Cataclysmo, the player's power is not in the units themselves, but in the defensive systems they create with the building stuff. Wall, towers, elevation. It's like everything you build makes units have more effective HP, if that makes any sense in some aspects. And also we also embraced a kind of binary outcome, which is more or less inspired by They Are Billions. I think you all know that game. We played a lot that game back in the past when we started Cataclysmo. And in Cataclysmo, you typically have to repel the wave completely, or you are completely destroyed. You don't have like a gray zone where you can more or less survive to the level. So we wanted that by design to avoid the gray zone where you barely survive, but yeah, you have to rebuild everything, and we wanted to avoid that frustrating moment. So yeah, I guess it's a very how to say it? It's an equilibrium between the power and the creativity, I would say, that makes you feel vulnerable, but at the same way you feel somehow powerful against a lot of enemies, I would say. So yeah.
I don't know if you want to continue, Max, or...
Yeah, I can. So, speaking of diplomacy, our recipe, it was simple. We wanted a big scale. We didn't want to have like 10 versus hundreds. We wanted maybe thousands versus tens of thousands. And this way, we allow a player to have hundreds, maybe thousands of units. And of course, with such a mass, if you take one single unit, he'll be extremely vulnerable to any small enemy squad. But if you take your own squad, it can deal with a lot of things. It's either using some defensive tools like towers or maybe traps or just in-game mechanics like kiting enemies. So yeah, it's like divided we fall. This is the recipe for diplomacy. But also, if we take one single unit, it's not really good to make him just a vulnerable puppet with that will be killed and is useless without its supporters. So we try to balance everyone this way that you can use these units separately in certain circumstances. Maybe you can use one unit for kiting a lot of enemies who run for him, and he'll survive this encounter while leading them away, these enemies away from the base. Or maybe you can put one single archer on a small tower, and he'll protect some part of your city from small squads of enemies who might come, like in 2 or 3. And if you don't protect, they will destroy the city. But here you have one archer, and he brings great game-changing impact just because you put him somewhere. So yeah. The recipe is divided with all, but each unit can be useful somehow without big mess.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you both, in a way, talked about something that I could say is kind of, it's the fact that we combine things that creates the power fantasy. And I think in the last spell, it's something similar. I think most of the power fantasy comes from the player progression and the scaling of heroes, because it's something we inherit from the roguelike genre, where it's the builds on heroes are very explosive, very exponential, where when you combine some weapons with some perks, with some stats, it becomes extremely powerful. So yes, there's also kind of this aspect of when combining certain elements in the right way, they multiplicatively become extremely powerful, and that makes it enough to overcome the masses of enemies. And for the last spell, the strength of heroes is something that we actually reinforced over the course of the early access. I think at the start we were a bit more committed on very dark fantasy aspect, very kind of a desperate feeling. And so we kept this for the start of the runs, where the heroes are really vulnerable and they don't do that much to enemies. It's still very hard. But with updates, we kind of made the late game heroes more powerful than before. For example, when we reworked the perks, we went for perks that are maybe a bit more explosive, with a bit more combinations. And that actually is something that we really liked, the players really liked, and it didn't break the fantasy. So yes, it's something we reinforced, and so now you you really have this feeling of, once I enter the late game, my heroes kind of become these supernatural beings that can really take on the hordes, and that works really well, I think. What is starting with the fantasy of being very vulnerable and going to be extremely powerful. And another thing I'd like to add for the kind of vulnerability aspect is probably the Iron Man aspect of the games. The fact that when you lose your entire run, makes it so that the stakes are extremely high. So every difficulty, every mistake is so important to a player, and really, I think, creates a sense of tension that's really strong. And I think that adds to the aspect that yes, you feel like you're very vulnerable because there's so much at stake.
Yeah, and all of our power is in the heroes. So when you do a miscalculation, and when, for example, you go to the style which is around enemy or whatever, you wanted to go somewhere, you go and that you're like, oh, I'm missing one move point or something, and then get outnumbered. It's for the Iron Man thing I'll talk about. When you lose a hero in the last spell, it's very punishing. Like, you literally lost 40% of your power, and it's great. Even if the heroes is like a god on the battlefield, when you lose it, you lose a very high power, and for this is really punishing. But I wanted to say it's a good transition for the other question. It's okay, so we are outnumbered, and the player can be submerged. It can have a really hard time to counter the horde. So when the player gets submerged by the horde, they can sometimes really lose nearly everything, even after beating the wave. So how do you make comeback possible? How do you keep the player motivated and not frustrated or exasperated? So I don't know if someone want to start. Max, maybe?
Okay. Well, that's that's a good question for Diplomacy, because initially we wanted to make our game like more old school, hardcore RTS, and we didn't plan some comeback mechanisms more than general save load system, which we have polished, so it works really well on every moment of the game and lets you come back to the point you want to. But we have a pause mechanic, which lets you So maybe you have beaten a difficult wave and it nearly destroyed everything, but you just press pause and you have all the time you want to think and manage all your economics before the next wave. However, it's not enough for some players, of course, and having the feedback from those who for whom this difficulty is really hard. Now we are planning to add one more difficulty, which is much easier, and we'll have some comeback mechanics. Yeah. So that's about diplomacy.
Yeah. Yes, it's a question we really struggled with Unveil SPL too, because we kind of, at the start, we had this approach of the roguelike genre, but the problem is that compared to other roguelike games, we have runs that last like 10 hours instead of 30 minutes, 1 hour. So losing a run for the player is much more of a commitment. Even playing one night is much more of a commitment. So we really had this aspect that players, when they thought the game was desperate, they would just abandon and retry. Even sometimes if they just had a run that was maybe not optimal, they were like, oh no, I don't want to try playing 2 hours and after that I lose. I really want the perfect start because I don't want to take any risks in losing time. So we really had to fix at least partially this aspect. And so yes, one of the solutions we had was a comeback mechanic where we introduced something that we call bone piles, where when the enemies go inside the town and die inside the town, they will at the end of the night leave kind of little piles of flesh that the player can scavenge to get resources and weapons. And so that makes it that so when your town gets submerged by the enemies, if you still manage to win the night, you will then have a bit of extra resources to rebuild what you lost maybe in this attack, which worked pretty well. The only downside, which is only half a downside, is that some players started using this as a main strategy and just not building walls, let the enemies come in and then get resources, which we can be okay with because it's another strategy and it can be fun. But if it's the main strategy, it can sometimes be a problem. But no, so we had this solution. We also made the buildings generally a bit more tanky, just last a bit longer. And I think the thing that was there from the start, but that really helped us, it's that in the last spell, the enemies focus only the main objective, which is the magic circle in the center of the town. And they will only hit other buildings if they are close to them. So most of the enemies will advance towards the town. They'll be near a building, hit it, but then the next turn they will go away towards the main objective. And so that makes it that so that the player is in danger in many cases, but that doesn't mean that all his town is in danger. And sometimes he can even lose without the town having been hit that much. And so that makes it so that the player is in situations where he could game over. But if he wins, he hasn't lost too much of his town. So that really helped.
Yeah, I think the thing behind comebacks, frustration, motivation, it's a huge challenge for those games. And for Cataclysmo especially, also because we decided to have binary outcomes. So that could be a huge problem. So you often either hold completely or get wrecked. So we wanted that sharp contrast to avoid the worst scenario for pacing, which is the one where the players thinks, oh no, I have to rebuild everything piece by piece, which is, I mean, the building system is quite enjoyable, but not so much, I would say, in order to force you to rebuild everything like several times. So yeah, here we had several options. One of the first options we had was the rewind system, which is basically a save load system as you have. So players could quickly retry from earlier status without losing tons of time. We also added one thing, which is the rebuild tool. We added it during the early access, which is basically after a wave, you can select an area, and if you have enough resources for it, you can rebuild it for like immediately. And that was a very asked feature for players, so we decided to develop it. And also, one thing I always smile when I think about it is that the blueprint system, because in Cataclysmo we have a blueprint system, which is basically you build whatever you want, and then you can save your structures for later. So you can just place the tower you specifically build like this in a very fast way. And this blueprint system came quite late in development. I would say maybe just some months or so before the early access release, because we broke with our previous publisher, so we had a window to really improve the game, and the blueprints was like the first thing in our backlog that we wanted to develop. And well, it was lucky we had time to do it, honestly, because without it, I'm sure the reviews will have been much worse. Because I really struggle with the fact of rebuilding things after losing a wave. So I completely understand players. So yeah, that was like a lucky shot for us during the release. Yeah.
So we will go to the next question now. So fighting the horde is only a part of our games. What place does planning and preparation hold in our game? How do you deal with the time constraints that it puts on the player? So I don't know if someone wants to begin for this.
I can continue if you want. I mean, in Cataclysmo, for example, the time pressure is not. I mean, let's say that planning in Cataclysmo is central, like in other strategy games. But players, as in the last spell, I think, and diplomacy is not an option for sure. The player can pause the game at any time, think to analyze the situation. So you don't have in that aspect that time pressure. But the time pressure comes, I mean, the time pressure still exists because it comes from the economy. So you have 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, to gather wood, stone, minerals, and to have a good production in terms of economy. So the limited time before each gatekeeping means that you have to prioritize and make decisions. So do you gather more resources, do great production, or you will start fortifying critical choke points? So you really need to read the map's limitations and characteristics to get the most of your economy and to adapt to the situation. So as I said, we don't have a very central time pressure, but the time pressure is basically the gatekeeping we had for the waves. So yeah. You can take as long as you want to plan once you have resources, but you are constantly under pressure to produce enough power to overcome the next wave. So that's basically what we have in Cataclysm at least.
Yeah. So now in the last spell, we don't have any time pressure since we are not a real-time strategy game. We are a turn-by-turn
That's true.
strategy game. So the time can't move without any action of the player. So yeah, we are not, for us, we are not talking about time pressure, but more about resource pressure. I don't know if we can say that. So yeah, for us, correct me if I am wrong, Victor, but the preparation is like very important, and like it begins even before the first wave, since there is a lot of things that the player can planify before even starting to fight the first wave. So it's something specific to the last spell, but when you start a run, you have just a moment to plan everything, and then you say, okay, I am ready, and then you hit next turn, and the combat begin. You can't build your haven or whatever at the beginning of a run, but you can plan your heroes, check the perks, check everything, the weapon stuff and everything, and you can plan all your run before even fighting the first wave. After, there is a lot of things that will come and shake everything, but you can plan a big part of your run just before we begin. So for that, with the turn by turn, you don't have a time pressure. And between every wave, you can build your haven, you can gear your heroes, you do the level up thing and everything. And at this moment, you have very limited resources to build building, to build defenses and everything. And this is where we have our time pressure, since every action is really important because of the lack of resources.
Yes, I think it emulates a bit like the same thing that you said, that the player has to prioritize and think, do I prefer to gain gold or to fortify my haven or to reinforce my heroes? It's kind of the same thing, just made in a different way.
It's like a limited amount of actions you have in a turn
Yes.
before you get attacked. Yeah.
And I think for what you said, the fact that we can really plan a lot during the run is kind of something that came from the mix of roguelike and turn-based tactical, where there are a lot of things where the roguelike aspect kind of wanted us to put more surprise and random towards during the run. But I think the tactical players are not that fond of too much random. So there are a lot of aspects where we went for things that can be way more planned by the player. So yes, for example, the perk tree can be seen from the start. Heroes have random perk trees, but you can see everything from the start, so you can plan the entirety of your hero from the start. And so yes, I think that's where it comes from.
As for diplomacy, I guess our situation is close to what Jorge said about Cataclysm. It's more the economical pressure. In fact, in diplomacy, there's a lot of lots of economical pressure due to the preparation phase and the battle phase. They are not differentiated. They merge one to another, and there are lots of economical disasters you can encounter even during the battle, like hunger, for example. And that impacts the ability to hire your units. So yeah, it's more about planning, and sometimes even pause can't help you. You can't predict everything because there are lots of things you have to manage. And yeah. I guess it's not less about time, more about the ability to manage things.
So would you say, I'm curious, would you say there's a bit more kind of reaction from the player than preparation? Or like in... because there are this kind of not surprises, but things that can happen. Does the player have to react to things maybe a bit more? Because it's something we have, I think, also in the last spell, though, where there are still a lot of things that can happen during the knight, and that are a bit more in the micro, where you have kind of small things that can happen. I don't know if I've made myself clear.
We try to nivellate all the micro management. You can do it, and it will help you on the hardest difficulties. But balance to the game the way that on the easy ones, it's not important. So to set each flag of each building a specific point, so you just adjust to the game mechanics, understand how it works in general, and maybe prepare some strategies in general. Not optimal, usually it's enough. But of course, there will be challenges during playtime. Like someone died and the disease started spreading, and we include lots of controllable randomness in our game. So to create some fun moments, but yeah, you have to overcome them somehow. But usually you do have tools to do that. So you have lots of buildings that can do different things. You can manage problems in different ways. For example, by building more defenses or more economy buildings, or just hiring more and more units. And yeah. So we've tried to make this randomness controllable.
Thanks.
Okay, so we can go to the next question. So in this game, the player face impossible siege with limited forces and resources. Is there room, for player creativity in building the most efficient defense possible while having restriction on resource and space? So we can begin, Victor, if you...
Yeah, I can begin with this one. So yes, I think in Velaspel, we can consider the town, the haven, kind of like a hero in some aspects, because it has you have multiple options of which buildings you can build, but the thing that's really important is in which order you build them, because a lot of players at the end of the run will have all the buildings or like a big part of them. But what's really important is what you start with, because that's what will influence, okay, during the run, what will I have more of at which point. And so we tried to make it so that there are multiple paths that the player can go for. We have multiple economic buildings, some that produce gold, some that produce directly items. And as I said, we have the mechanic also of bone piles. And they all cost, in some way, either passive production or will use a resource that is workers. So the player has to choose what to use their workers for. And so this creates this kind of choice from the player of what will I go for depending on my strategy, what do I prefer. So this is where you get kind of the creativity aspect. It's more like a very gameplay creativity. And I think the thing that's most important for this aspect to work is that you have to have a really good balance. So if the options are not balanced, and we had this happen a lot in Velaspel, the players will find the best solution and will say, okay, we just have to build like this every time and just build exactly the same thing every time in every game. And yes, I think that really kills creativity. So what we aim to do was to really have a good balance between the buildings so that players can not build whatever they want, but choose between multiple things to build and ways to build their town, and that they all kind of work. And I think we really improved that over the course of the game. Still at the very highest difficulties, I think there's only some builds that are viable for the players. So you can't make it perfect, but yeah, we definitely try to improve that over time.
Yeah, so really understandable here, because in diplomacy, had exactly the same thing during early access, which lasted for about 2 years, if I remember correctly. We had changed balance multiple times, tuned mainly, but it was a lot of due to the forming meta, because we create something, change balance a bit, maybe add new units, and the meta changes. We see that players start playing in a certain way, and it's much more effective than the other ways. So we tune balance again, and this kind of stuff. It has not been seen during the development, but it's more. It has arisen while we were watching the players play. But also, it's not the only way we went, because we have quite a large number of enemies, differentiating by stats and numbers, and so they are like large ones which are really hard to kill, small ones which can be sent into a flight by catapult, and for different enemies, for different packs of enemies, usually have to prepare some sort of different defense. So this way, there is no such meta like you build only one type of defense and only one type of units. Also, randomness plays a huge role here. Maps in our game, they are mainly generated randomly. We set some things like number of resources, the amount of certain types of terrain, but each time you start the mission, the terrain, it will be slightly different, and you'll have to adapt. So you'll have to build your defense in other ways, maybe to counter the attacks. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel kind of how to say it. I feel in your skin the struggle of creativity and balancing things, like two parts of the same rope, I would say. And in Cataclysmo we had the same problems because I think one of the main aspects where Cataclysmo shines the most is the building and modular system. So yeah, we had to give to the player enough creativity to make the things he or she wants to do, and at the same time we have to keep those buildings and those constructions balanced enough in order to avoid breaking the game and be the main strategy. So yeah, I would say limited time, space, and resources is what I think drive most creative solutions. So if you have like full freedom, you won't be able to think about the creative solution to the puzzle. But if you have limited and some restrictions, then is when you think about how I'm gonna overcome that challenge, and then is when creativity arises, I would say. And I also remember that one thing that comes up a lot in Cataclysmo in the feedback discussions and players discussions is about the unit limits, because we have a limited amount of units, which right now I think is 70 or 75, I don't remember right now. But we deliberately didn't want to allow having, I don't know, 200 units or whatever, Because yeah, I mean, sure, having 200 units may reinforce the power fantasy and the medieval fantasy about defending a super huge castle and everything, but it will quickly make the game very easy. So I think the main aspect here is that the restrictions force players to think carefully about positioning, about building optimal stuff, about having very creative solutions. So yeah, that's where the real tactical creativity emerges, I would say. And yeah, we wanted the fantasy of defending a fortress against impossible odds, number of enemies, but we wanted to be with real tension and a need for a smart design, not just overwhelming force, which is sometimes in a lot of games the main strategy. So we wanted to avoid that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel you on the limiting the player thing. We had a moment during early access where the players would just there was this defensive building, the ballista, where the players will just build only this, and they will just literally have walls made of ballistas and build only that. And so we had to obviously limit it because we didn't like the fantasy of it. Like your base had a really strange
The layout, yeah.
yeah, it just didn't really make sense. So we had to limit it, and the players obviously weren't that happy when we made it. But I think it's changes where you have to make them for the balance, the fantasy, and in the long run, it's better for the game.
Oh, well, that's interesting because, as I said, in diplomacy we wanted to keep the scale. This way we couldn't have like few units. We didn't want to limit them, and we don't have limitations, the strict limitations. But it's hidden, usually just out of space, because units need people need houses need places, and yeah, usually the large amount of units, like maybe 2000s, it is possible to obtain, but you need to build the whole map, have lots of houses, and it plays its role in endless mode, for example, where yes, people they create a castle which takes the full map, and in the end game, maybe days of play, they can have these amounts, and I guess that gives them this feeling of the power of your own empire, like castle.
I think it's a very elegant solution for the gap of units. We have something similar in Cataclysmo, but the problem we have is that you can build vertically whatever you want. So yeah, the space is not just a plane; it's the full 3D environment, I would say. So yeah, I mean, we are softly limiting the amount of units you can have by space, but if you want, you can just make some skyscrapers with a lot of people there, and well, that's all. But yeah, I understand you.
So we'll go to the next question now. So in this type of game, terrain is often an important element. So walls, hills, destructible resources, choke points, and etc. So how do you use this in your games? I don't know if someone wants to begin.
I can begin if you want. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, for us, it's level design is in Cataclysmo is about designing a puzzle, more or less. I mean, we have very large terrains, but we also try to design them as a puzzle. So we design maps offering multiple solutions, but usually at least there is one clear solution that the player will see immediately, I would say. And that solution is often inspired by real world castle design. So it's like if you have more or less the knowledge about how castles work, or at least you have seen some movies about castles, you will eventually reach that main solution to the puzzle. For example, in Cataclysm as well, the fog of war is also critical because it makes you have a limited vision of the terrain, and not being able to see where the threat is coming from reinforce that feeling of being surrounded and forces the player to scout and plan carefully. So the puzzle and the level design, it's also about exploring it in a very smart way, I would say, to reach the choke points or reaching that moment where you feel that this place is a good place to make a tower, for example. It's a very rewarding sensation. And well, yeah, finding and securing a good natural choke point, it's like super rewarding. It feels like you are taming somehow the map and imposing some kind of order into the chaos. And well, but in any case, that said, it's like we made some compromises because sometimes the terrain in Cataclysmo can feel a bit 2D or flat in some aspects, but that's somehow intentionally because too much irregularity made back in the past building stuff very frustrating because you had to make sure you put a brick of one in all the tiles where auras can go through. It can be very, very, very painful and very frustrating. So we wanted to keep the building system like fluid and responsive. So the strategic puzzle stayed fun without fighting against the system, about making it for more fluent, I would say.
Yeah, I can continue if you want. Yes, in Velasspell, I think level design is kind of maybe a bit more limited, at least if we're talking about just level design. Because yes, we don't have an exploration aspect. Everything outside of the town is only used during the night for when enemies come. The player has no other interaction with it than it actually being obstacles for the enemies. And another big limitation we had is that the enemy AI is not really meant for complex pathing. Also because of the tile by tile nature of it, where we can't really have complex choke points or paths or just so mainly what we have to do with the level design is we can have large choke points, we can have small obstacles here and there, but other than that we can't really do anything too advanced, or it will most of the time make the enemies clump together and be blocked by each other and such. So yes, I think it's really hard to then create maps that are different from each other, and especially what we're always trying to do, and that's really difficult, is to have zones in the maps that have different feels, because if every single place in the map is played the same, then that's absolutely uninteresting. I think so yes, we try to do it by having areas where there's more density of obstacles, others where it's really flat, and playing with the line of sight of the player. But yeah, I think it's maybe an aspect of the game that's a bit maybe weak. But the thing that comes to counterbalance it, I think, is the wave design, where most of what's interesting for the player about playing around space and where to go movement is more where are the enemies? Are the enemies clumped together? Are they really spread? Are they coming in multiple groups from different sides? And it's more on this aspect that we tend to design a lot and play a lot on the maps than on the actual level design. And the level design is more meant to complement this by having zones where, obviously, if there are a lot of obstacles, it will split the enemies into multiple different groups. In this place or in this place, we will create enemies that are more clumped together, that are ones after the other, and such things. And I think it's more on this aspect that we create I'd say the level design, because the player plays with the level only during battle, than on the actual obstacles of it. So yeah.
As for diplomacy, it's we have a flat space, so and you can send your troops only on your own walls, towers, and stuff like this. But first thing, we have random generation, which we set up, and the core to our level design is how we set up lots of parameters for the level, so that there will be some interesting stuff generated. We do draw sometimes something on our own to maybe an interesting choke point near the town hall you have to protect, or maybe an interesting campsite with enemies. But the core to this is the random generation system. And the player has to adapt and to use his own defenses, let it be walls, let it be traps, to somehow build around the mountains, the rivers. I think what helps here is that we have physical like arrows. So all these archers, crossbows, they fire by physical trajectories. They can miss, of course, if the enemy is running, for example, and it creates some kind of chaos, but also it lets you create some more strategical things like choke points from your own walls, for example, maybe line of defenses of different the towers of different height, because the higher the tower, the further the archer will shot. Yes, so this is how we deal with it.
Okay.
So we are going for two specific questions. So the first one is for you, Jorge. So in Cataclysmo, the construction is quite advanced. So did you encounter any big challenge in regard to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to have Adria, which is the technical director here, to talk about all the big challenges we have in programming aspects, I would say. But yeah, we had a lot of challenges in both in terms of design and technical aspects. Just to make sure everyone understands how the building system works. In Cataclysmo, the building systems, the modular building system, relies in tiny 1x1 bricks. So you have that kind of granularity. So you can stack them, and there is like a structural integrity that needs to feel very clear and consistent, because otherwise players won't understand why their constructions will fall because of, I don't know, maybe losing one small brick at the bottom. We also added what we call the toughness system, which is very simple. The higher the wall is, the stronger it is. So that forces the player to build vertical walls instead of thicker walls, big walls in horizontally. And I would say that getting that balance between building very complex structures, but at the same time, structures that are very helpful in terms of balance, in terms of defense, it was a huge challenge. Also, on the AI side of enemies, we had to iterate a lot through it, because it was a pain to make enemies understand where they can traverse buildings or towers or whatever, because enemies needed to recognize walls as obstacles, but without getting completely stuck. So it was like a mixed behavior there. We had to teach them how to understand that they can be stopped by walls, but not thinking about walls as a target. The same way you had in the last spell, our enemies just focus the main building, but during the path they can be somehow, how to say it, they can change more or less their objective. If you have, for example, a unit which is very active and it's attacking a lot, so we had a very techy balance there between what the game can support in terms of technical aspects and what design needs, because we had to make sure the game runs on low specs incel core and other low spec setups, I would say. And yeah, one thing we also tried during the development is we try to make enemies navigate on top of walls. That was, I don't know, that was very difficult to accomplish, because walls can be super complex and at the same time are made by players, and at the same time they can fall. Well, there is a lot of implications there. We had to we decided to avoid them. It was not needed at all, but we wanted to try at least if that can be a possibility. And beyond that, the game had to handle a massive number of entities in real time. So all the bricks, all the units, all the enemies, we had to handle at the same time and maintain the performance while the entire construction system remains interactable and extractable. And yeah, well, we had to make sure that all of this worked in real time and reliably. And this was like one of the hardest challenges we had during development, for sure. The building system and managing a lot of entities, I would say, at the same time. I guess Max and me, we jumped into very similar problems during the development, I would say.
Yes. I can relate to the one with the walls, because we had the exactly same problem. And during early access, we've changed it a bit, and now it works good.
Now, yeah.
But we had the same problem and had lots of troubles with it.
Yeah, it's more about a techie thing, but we started doing like pathfinding requests for every kind of unit. And at the end, we decided to make them super dumb. And they are just traveling like a flow field, which tells every tile which is the next tile they have to go. And we modify it like in real time. So we made it viable for larger units, and it worked very well. I don't know what kind of technology you used, but that was the one that worked for us.
Diplomacy is on Unity dots, so we use anti-component system there. It's quite easy for this type of game. But as for the enemy AI, they are also quite dumb here. So what we've made them target the walls only if these walls are really, really close to them.
Mhm.
So we don't have to search for these walls in a larger area, which is of course quite consuming.
Yeah.
This way, yeah, they will still try to attack walls, but only if they're close.
Thank you for your answers. So the next question, the next specific question, so is for you, Victor. So having this many enemies in a turn-based game is quite rare. So how did that influence the design of enemies compared to a more classic turn-based tactical game?
Yes. So obviously this is something we also had a bit of difficulty with, because I think the how we approach enemy design kind of changed with time. I think the enemies in the last spell are a bit maybe too complex, because we approach them from maybe a bit too much from, okay, how are enemies made in a classic tactical game? Yes, how do we bring enemy diversity? Is by having new enemies that do new things, have new attacks and new behaviors, and maybe even have multiple attacks that they can do. And I think now with a bit more time to think about it, that's not really the right approach, because I think what really works in the last spell is actually the units that are the most simple and straightforward. So enemies that are very simple, just have one thing that they do, they work the best. And to go a bit more in depth about this, I think we have different tiers of enemies that don't have the same frequency. So, for example, the tier 1 enemies will be what constitutes the horde. There will be hundreds of them, whereas tier 3s or tier 4s, they will be very rare, and when you have them in the wave, there are maybe 3, 4, 5 of them. And something that we didn't have at the start, where it was we had a bit less difference between the tiers, where the higher tiers of enemies were a bit more frequent and a bit more numerous, but in exchange they were not as strong as they are now. And that didn't work as well, because the player had just too much things to focus on, because the enemies were too complex. There were many of them, and he can't just anticipate everything that they will do, like in a tactical game where you just have like 5 or 6 enemies. So that didn't work. So we made them stronger but rarer. So that's what we did for the strong enemies, and I think it works well. Another thing we did was just reduce the diversity inside a single wave, where before we had waves where we had 5, 6 different enemies. Now it's on average much less, so that the player can know, okay, in this wave I will deal with this enemy, this enemy, this enemy, and it's easier to account for. And the last thing I think that I remarked is that what functions the most, I think, for enemies is firstly everything that has to do with pathing and behavior. Everything that's okay, this enemy will target heroes, or this enemy will go towards this type of building, or this enemy is just faster or slower than others. This works really well, because the player can still analyze the enemies as a swarm, because they all do the same thing at the same time. So that works really well. Similarly, I think everything that's more on the defensive aspect of an enemy, having defensive capabilities, passives, works pretty well, because the player has to think about it during their turn. So he can think about things one after the other, or in context. Whereas what I think doesn't really work in our game, or works less, is everything that's active. and we have enemies that, for example, have attacks that they have to charge, and AoEs and such things, and it doesn't really work because when you have multiple units, the player just has, I think, too much to take into account. And yes, so I think that's how now I will go about it. Obviously, we can't just change every enemy in the game, but yeah, I think that's what should be focused on. And yes, I'm really curious to know if you had kind of any design intentions on the enemies, because maybe it was easier for you because you had more the angle of RTS games. So yeah, did you have any difficulty with this or not at all?
In our case, I think we had to simplify a lot, as you said, enemies' behavior, because as you said, we have like hundreds of enemies, and the player can't start doing micromanagement like every time, like focusing this target or focusing this target because he's charging an attack or something like this. So we decided to think about enemies as a tower defense perspective. So enemies in tower defense are just like a HP pool mostly, and some of them die and they spawn other enemies, and that kind of others are more faster, others have more HP, and we decided to make enemies that way because it really felt better. It's simple, but having complex enemies was not the way to go, and we just have one complex enemy, which is kind of a mini boss that appears sometimes in some levels, and it really makes the player to focus on that specific enemy. But as I said, it's one enemy in 100 or even 1,000 enemies, so you can keep your attention towards that enemy and the behavior instead of paying attention to everything that is happening in the game. So yeah, we had similar problems.
As for diplomacy, the key to the design of our enemies was that we wanted the player to feel like he is battling an army, or she, and these armies should should support each other. So usually, if we take some basic enemies, I don't know, rebels, they have these really low health units who die from one or two attacks, who go straight forward to a castle, but they are quite ineffective against your walls. But they also bring catapults, which are really effective against your walls. So they support each other. And to reach catapults, you have to either have quite high towers, or you have to maybe bring some squad from the way the enemy came to you. So it's like a simple example of having different enemies who support each other. And generally, all the enemies are designed this way so that they can be put together in one wave, and the player will have to deal with them in some different ways, but not getting into micro, because micro is usually quite not quite fun. We have some game mechanics that help the player to avoid micro. For example, you can target priority, you can target the strongest target or the nearest target, and that helps a lot. Also, we have some bosses, and for them there was lots of design efforts because they are really giant, and we have actually 2 bosses, I think, who feel like bosses. One is Ozzy, and he has several key abilities, several phases, and to bring him down, you have to have quite a big army. You have to study his patterns of attacks, adapt to them, and so we've tried to make enemies fun and have something to them that will differentiate them from other enemies in our game.
One funny thing I wanted to mention before is that we have an enemy which is like a small version of the basic enemy, which doesn't it doesn't barely affect any balance because it has very low health and it deals very low damage, and it's basically used for in order to have like huge number of enemies. But when you play in very difficult stages, because of, I mean, your units in the extreme difficulty in Cataclysmo have just 1 HP. So those enemies are quite, you have to pay attention to them. But in other difficulties, it's like, well, it's something that just explode as soon as it receives an arrow. So yeah, it's like a funny detail about enemy design in Cataclysmo.
Funny, because we have an opposite design solution. We have like a soft cap of the number of enemies over which we don't really want to come over, roughly 25,000. So for the hardest difficulties for some fractions like rebels, usually these 2500s they are quite easy, and to make them harder, we have enemies who are who looks like quite like the Euro ones, but they have a bit more HP, and yeah.
Okay.
And we add them when we have reached the limit, we add them instead of the low HP ones. Yeah.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So that's it for our panel. Sorry, few against many, designing overwhelming tactical encounter. So thanks a lot, everyone, for being here. We hope it gave you a new perspective, on what make those desperate last stand so exciting to play. So good luck surviving to the horde, and bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
see you. Thanks all.
Thanks.